My grandmother read her horoscope and talked to the conjure woman to make the right tea to solve a problem. Some of my friends find peace in yoga and Buddhist meditation. Other Black folk gather crystals, turn tarot cards, and set up ancestral altars, and go to church every Sunday. Or maybe they don't, because churches condemn their practices, but they have no problem with Jesus.
Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
Welcome to Diverse Devotions, Black Belief Across Boundaries, where we wade into the waters of religious multiplicity, Black faith, and spiritual journeys. Discover what happens when Black spirituality breaks the rules of how being religious is supposed to work. I'm Monica A. Coleman, writer, university professor, ordained clergy person, and initiated Iyala Orisha. In Diverse Devotions, I'll lead you through a tapestry of captivating narratives and thought-provoking dialogues. We'll hear the spiritual journeys of Black folk who practice more than one religion. We'll also hear from individuals whose acceptance of different religions emanates from an understanding of laws of nature and universal spiritual principles. From the freedom of religious multiplicity to the personal journeys of transformation, each episode offers enlightening perspectives that expand the boundaries of Black belief. So, if you're a seeker hungry for knowledge, religiously devout, an educator curious to understand, or simply intrigued by spirituality's rich diversity, follow and like Diverse Devotions. Be a part of this journey, because at the heart of these stories, you'll find the spirit of freedom. I am glad to welcome onto the podcast today Dr. Salim Faraji. Salim Faraji is professor and chair of Africana Studies at California State University, Dominguez Hills. He is also the founding executive director of the Masters of Arts and International Studies Africa program at Concordia University Irvine in Ghana, West Africa. As a theological pluralist and interfaith practitioner, he is currently an ordained minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church and a practicing African traditional priest, Okomfo, who has been initiated in both the Akan traditions of Ghana, West Africa, and ancient Egyptian religious practice. Dr. Faraji is author of The Roots of Nubian Christianity Uncovered, The Triumph of the Last Pharaoh, and a contributor to the recent publications Life Under the Baobab Tree, Africana Studies and Religion in a Transitional Age, and New Perspectives on Ancient Nubia. More importantly, Salim is a longtime friend, about 25 years, and so I'm just glad to welcome you and excited for you to share some of your journey and your reflections on it with our listeners today. Welcome, Salim.
No, thank you so much. I, consider the opportunity to be here with you on your podcast and talk about this exciting and relevant topic. And then African American Christianity. That's for me, that's the diaspora ancestral tradition.
Mm.
That's what it is. Right. And so even beyond the theology and the hermeneutics that come out of the Black church, it's the culture that I appreciate. The culture of our tradition in the Black church.
Yeah.
Our music, our oratory is powerful and inspirational, right? And so forth. So for me, that is our diaspora ancestral spirituality, the Black church, or in the other traditions we've created here, right? Whereas the Akan give me the ancestral, ecological, communal connection, and then of course ancient Christian canon. It's just this cosmic understanding of human nature, and the scholarship and science that they produced is just unbelievable. I'm writing a chapter now on ancient Egyptian priests in late antiquity, so during the Greco-Roman period. So what happened to the Egyptian priests after Egypt had been conquered and colonized by the Greeks and Romans, right? So I'm writing a chapter now, and they were multilingual, multicultural, multi-religious, and they had to be. because they had been conquered, right? And so they became more proficient in Greek philosophy than the Greeks. They became more proficient in understanding Greek culture. They even understood the Judeo-Christian tradition because you see it in their texts from that period, all the while maintaining deep roots in a 3,000-year-old tradition of ancient Christian Kemet. And so it's amazing to me, I tell people, I say, wow, this is a model, if you will, right? For how you maintain a traditional priesthood in the face of encroachment, in the face of colonialism, in the face of being oppressed, right? And now, of course, Egypt was different because everybody around the world admired.
Right, that helped.
So that helped. So when the Persians came in, they was like, we conquered y'all, but we want to be like y'all.
Well, I mean, and that's not so unlike some other situations,
Yes,
right? They just don't all say it out loud.
They don't say it out loud, right? And so the Greeks, the Romans, all of them, they were studying with the priests in the temple. And so, and another thing, for the Christian community, the patristic writers were studying with Egyptian priests.
Right. They're all North African.
Right. Yeah. They were studying with Egyptian priests. And so that's what I'm writing now. And I think it's a model because, like I said, they were multilingual, they were multicultural, and they were multi-religious, all the while being anchored in their own ancestral tradition.
Right. So if I understand correctly, right, you're not going to every Sunday waking up and going to a place that is simultaneously Black church, Akan, and Kemetic, right? You have different communities that you spend time in, not at the same time, correct?
Yes, not at the same time.
Okay.
Probably the community in terms of like community fellowship, the community I've been the most active in recent years is the Akan community. And then for some reason since the pandemic, I haven't been active in a Christian community or church, right?
Yeah.
Beyond
coming home and then getting back out is a whole different story.
Beyond theological education. So I remain active in terms of theological education, right? The University of Laverne here in Southern California, they had an institute called the Ecumenical Center for Black Church Studies. Right. And so I remain active in how do we provide theological education for Black clergy and Black pastors, because that's a passion of mine as well, right? Theological education. And so I have been active in theological education as in my ministerial role, but in terms of spiritual religious practice, it's been the Akan and Kemetic traditions, which is what I I do on a daily and weekly basis. Yeah.
Well, and that takes me to my next question, right? So you have children. Do you raise them multiply religious, or do you raise them in one tradition, or you just be like, look around and figure it out? Like, how do you, right? I mean, yeah, right. How does that work in your family even?
Excellent question. My two adult children who are now 30 and 32.
They were just 7. Okay.
Yeah, they were just 7 when you met them. Basically, they experienced spirituality really through the lens of myself and what I was dealing with when they were young. Right. And so my adult children, they were baptized and Christian in a United Methodist Church. In fact, Crossroads United Methodist in Compton, California, Reverend Lydia Waters, who was there at the time. She also paid for me and another brother's trip to the Million Man March back in '95. Right? She covered all our expenses, right? So y'all go. And so they were, but yet at the same time, my practice in Egyptian and Akan spirituality, they were pretty much raised in that as well. My two smaller children now, I have an 11 and a 9-year-old. They're pretty much, I really focus on the Akan tradition and the ancient Nile Valley traditions with my smaller children, with some education about the Judeo-Christian tradition. Because again, the world we live in, right, we need to be aware and conversant. And even they're in classroom and somebody says, I don't know. Yeah, like when Jonah got swallowed by the whale, and then they're like, well, who's Jonah and what is that?
Right.
Right. But in terms of practice and spiritual formation, it's the Akan and the Egyptian Nubian spirituality. And then education for the Judeo Christian tradition.
So you said a bit about, and thank you so much for sharing that, right? I know that's personal, but I'm just so curious, right? So for those who are multiply religious like you, do we pass this on, right? You said a bit about how sometimes Christians receive your knowledge and your affiliation with other traditions. What does Aso or Aset or your Kemetic traditions and your Akan traditions think about your multiple religiosity, you might say, right? Your affiliations with other traditions as well. Do they know? Do they care?
They do know, and I get the sense that they are proud. That may be too strong a word, and it also may be it may be also because of me attending graduate school, right, and getting a doctorate degree, and and when I say proud, meaning like we remember, right, when you were being cultivated in this tradition, and now you've gone on to do this, and you haven't forgotten the tradition, and you're representing it. And so someone asked me this question. I did a podcast maybe a couple of years ago, and I was like, look, on the ATR side, we're fine. We're fine with the pluralism and the inclusivism, right? Even throughout, in fact, I think we had this conversation before. In Asia, Africa, the South Pacific, right, all these traditions, that's the norm. It's not the exception. It's not blasphemous, right? I visited Japan like 2 years ago, right? And of course, I was excited to visit both Shinto shrines and Buddhist shrines, which many Japanese are part of both communities for very different reasons. And it's not a big deal, right? And certainly my travels in Ghana and other places in Africa, I know Christianity has a very strong presence there, but for someone to be going to a Presbyterian and Methodist church, right? But they're still doing traditional medicine. Their culinary practice is still traditional, and some folk are still going to see the Okomfo after they go talk to the Christian pastor, or who they call Safo in Ghana, right? And so it's very very fluid. I always I've told this story. I took a group of students. I think we mentioned in my bio, I was working for Concordia Irvine here, and I established a master's program in Ghana. And so one of the sites, we went to go visit the Ga Manche, the king of the Ga people in Jamestown, in Accra. And I had a student who was from Eritrea. He was Muslim. And he said, man, I need to go pray. I need to go make salat. The Ga king, who was a Christian himself, he was Roman Catholic, but because he's a Ga king, he was also a traditionalist, right?
Right.
Traditional Ga spirituality and culture. He said, no problem. We have a mosque on the palace grounds. He called one of the court attendants, to take this young man, my student, to the mosque on the polished premises of the Garmente, right? And so it was like, it's not a big deal, right?
Right.
It is a big deal to some folk, but what I'm saying is that the fluidity is more common, right, in the so-called global South, or right, like I said, Africa, Asia, the South Pacific, and the Americas, and so forth, right? I'm here in Southern California. My Mexican American colleagues and students, right? Some of them born and raised Roman Catholic, but they still have curanderos, Christian healers in their family because they come and tell me, right? So they're Roman Catholic, but they're still practicing the indigenous spirituality of the indigenous people of Mexico, right? The Aztec, Toltec, the Mictec, right? These peoples and so forth. So this is all over the world. And so I think with the Akan or Sarset, right?
Oh, yeah.
And other Egyptian, other communities and so forth, there's more tolerance, if you will, and grace, because their understanding of spirituality is different. It's not necessarily tied up into an exclusivist proclamation or an exclusivist revelation, right? Or the need to evangelize and propagate and so forth, right? I usually get more of that, of course, here, from people, right, who've been raised in the traditions like we all have, basically, and think other things, of course, are erroneous or evil or pagan or blasphemous and so forth. And I don't want to overstate, because in Ghana you have people who they're like no, right, to the no to the indigenous traditions, because of Christian training and so forth. But it tends to be more fluidity and more tolerance and more respect. Yeah.
So you live your multiplicity out loud, obviously. Do you feel like there's people who misunderstand your path or who have problems with it? I mean, you've mentioned some of the experiences you've had in some churches, right? But what would you say is like maybe a common misunderstanding about, your own religious path, your own spirituality?
I think a common misunderstanding is, okay, that person or that individual is confused. Right? They're confused. They're confused. They're not grounded in any one specific tradition. They're a syncretist, right?
And that's not meant as a positive term.
Yeah, not in a positive way.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think the biggest is that this person is confused, this person is lost, or the person has lost their way, and so forth. So no, please.
I was gonna say, so did that make you feel ever like times like a minority amongst other Black people, right? You gave these numbers about how many African Americans, right, are affiliated with Protestant Christianity or Christianity in general. And it's right, 70%, as you said, right? So that means you're numerically a minority, but do you feel like one, or not at all? You don't even think about it?
I don't feel like a minority, right? In the sense of, I'm outnumbered, right? Although mathematically that may be true. For me, my path has been fulfilling and transformative, and the blessings and experiences that I've experienced on this path on multiple levels, multiple dimensions. Like even in the Black church tradition, right? You got to know him for yourself, right? The way I live and the way I approach the divine, the cosmos, right? I've seen it firsthand move in ways that are mind-boggling, So in terms of my own spiritual practice, I'm as adamant as anyone would be adamant in their way.
You're adamant about your ways.
Yes, I'm adamant about my way because just like you, I've
Mhm.
seen it for myself.
Right.
I've seen it for myself. I've seen the experiences that I had, this unique path, right, of holding these traditions together. I have, in fact, I told some of the stories when we were at University of Delaware, right, back in 23 about, some of my, experiences and so forth. And not only with me, with other people,
Mhm.
other people's lives have been transformed. When for me, they awaken to who we are, people of African descent, and our culture and our spirituality, and how we approach the cosmos, the divine, our ancestors, ecology, family, community, dance, medicine, cooking. Right, this is a practice that governs every area, of our life as human beings. And so it's so rich and it's so fulfilling, right? I never feel outnumbered or
Yeah.
the minority, right? What I feel, which is one of the reasons why I continue, I guess, to remain in the Black church tradition. What I feel is, oh, how I wish all of us could get this. That's how I feel.
That's how I definitely can see that. You began our conversation talking about being, a child of the Great Migration, and, I am as well. What does your path or your different traditions have to say about freedom, right? About justice, right? About, you've talked about the Blackness of your traditions in terms of Africanity, right? And your ancestors. But, Black people always trying to be more and more free for obvious reasons, right? So is your faith a part of that at all? Do your faith have anything to say about justice or freedom?
Well, definitely. I mean, without a doubt, in ancient Kemet, Kush, or Egypt and Libya, right, the preeminent moral philosophy and ethical practices rooted in Ma'at, right? And the older I get, back in the day, that was just, a Hotep and a Ma'at, right?
Yes.
But now it's beyond any cliche or change that we could ever say. It's beyond symbolism. It's a practice. Right? I have helped the homeless and the widow, the poor and the disenfranchised. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not cheated. I have not killed. I have honored my parents. I have honored my ancestors. I have honored the great spirit. Right? I live in a way that my consciousness is light, my consciousness is free, because I attempt each and every day to live according to Ma'at, to live according to justice. And an ancient kingdom, right? Where there is no attempt of peace, there is no Ma'at, truth and justice. Right? They go hand in hand. And so without a doubt, the Kushite and Kemetic tradition speaks to that. The Akan tradition, we live in a society that's highly racialized.
Yeah.
And I try to communicate. In my scholarship, I very rarely, if all, use the word race. Am I right?
Yeah. As you're saying it, I'm thinking about that. Yeah.
I don't talk about race. I talk about the humanity and dignity of African people, and then all human beings. I talk about our spirituality, our culture, our history, our language. Race is a construction. Where I'm going with this is that you can't find this in indigenous African ethical systems, right? Spiritual systems. Yeah. So for me, the Akan tradition, I'm also reading Akan philosophers, right? Which you don't have to be an Okomfo or the practice of Akan spirituality to read Akan philosophy and even political philosophy. So I've also, over the years, immersed myself in continental African philosophy. So I'm thinking about Kwesi Reredu or Kwame Getty. These are two well-known Akan philosophers in the idea of the human. Onipa is the word for human in the Akan language. And their understanding of humanity has nothing to do with racial constructs. Your humanity is based on your ability to be a just human being with a beautiful character, right? Beauty is as beauty does, right? Beauty isn't only aesthetics, but beauty is also ethics in the Akan tradition. So the idea of the Onipa, the human being, I love it, right? And I hear it like, oh, that, I wish I could say it in tree, like, oh, that person is a person. Oh, that's a person. Oh, in other words, that's a good human being because of how they act and how they behave in society and so forth, right? So in a Akan spiritual, I like this emphasis of the Onipa, human, and human behavior, and human compassion and community. And so all humans, we have, according to Akan spirit, we have Nkrabia, right? Similar to Ori in the Yoruba tradition, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have Nkrabia. What is that? Okra, that's our soul mission, our soul destiny. Everyone was born for a particular reason. And so the purpose of life is for Onipa, the human being, to realize Nkrabia, their soul mission. And so how do you do that? Abrabo, which is equivalent to Ma'at, right? Living justly and fairly in community. That's how you lay the foundation to realize whatever Inyami or Okomfo, right? The great spirit, the creator, has sent you to do, right? So it's Nkrabia, Abrabo, your divine mission, and then living justly, right? If you do that, then you should experience Ohanto, which means contentment. Assombui, peace, equivalent to Hetep in ancient Egypt, right? And Asetana, enjoyment.
Yeah.
So you pursue your divine purpose in Krabia, you live justly on the planet, Abrabo, and you should, right, experience and cultivate, right, contentment, peace, and enjoyment in life, right? And so it's definitely, both these traditions bring, for me, a powerful ethical practice, as well as, you know, the culture and spirituality, which is also a part of ethical practice as well. And so, and I find myself just more drawn, you know, again, to revisiting this, you know, the older I get, like, okay, what, you know, this Ma'at is really, this, you know, this is real, this is powerful, right? Because in African culture, justice and ethics is about relationality.
And
right?
if we live in community well, if we actually really lived in
Live in
community well,
community.
there would be justice, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So let's, you know, we have a lot of different kinds of listeners to the podcast. Someone's listening and they're hearing you and they want to learn more, or they want to begin on a path akin to yours, right? What would you suggest? Where do you think they should start, right?
Wow.
You know, I mean, maybe they don't want to take the same, you know, they want to take a shorter
Mhm.
path, right? to the same,
Shorter
to the
path.
same place. Where do you think they should start?
I think they should start with general reading in ancient Nile Valley history,
Mhm.
culture, and spirituality. So books written primarily
Mhm.
by scholars of Africa and the African diaspora.
Mhm.
Although, you know, we read everybody.
Right.
Right. That's my starting ground. That's my foundation. But this is something to learn from everyone, right? And so, but having said that, you know, authors of, you know, Africa, the African diaspora, I would say begin there. I would also, one of the things that I was doing back in the, in the 90s is that I was visiting. In fact, I've taught, of course, right,
Right.
world religions courses.
Right.
I teach an African religions course at Cal State Dominguez Hills, where I teach. I've
Right.
also taught African religions course at Payne Theological Seminary,
Mhm.
which is the flagship seminary of the AME Church. And so a requirement that I always give as an assignment is that students have to go visit these communities. Right.
Mhm.
And so I would encourage folk, yes, to read, right? To read in Akan spirituality, Yoruba spirituality, the indigenous traditions of, I don't know, whatever, the Zulu, the David Lay, the Shona, just read, right? The men that read in African indigenous spirituality and
Mhm.
philosophy,
Right.
right? As well as the ancient and the Nile Valley. And then also visit communities, right? Visit a Yoruba community or fellowship or house if it's in your neighborhood, a con if it's in your neighborhood, Santeria, in other words, get a, your own direct experience and witness as opposed to it being mediated to you.
Right.
Someone telling you what it is and so forth. So I think that's important to visit communities and to talk with people who are practicing these spiritual traditions and so forth. If you are in churches, Methodist, Baptist,
Mhm.
Presbyterian, Pentecostal, and so forth,
Right.
I would say set up study groups within churches or Bible studies,
Mhm.
right, where you deal with, let me see, and they revise it too. Hugh Page out of University of Notre Dame, the Africana Bible, right, which is a commentary from an African centered perspective. I would say spend more time in that literature, right, than these other publishing houses who I won't mention, who
Well,
think they can talk about that tradition
mhm.
independent of Africa. For me, it's preposterous and absurd. The Old Testament mentions Egypt and Nubia are the next two frequently most mentioned countries other than Israel. Other than that, Egypt and Nubia disproportionately, right?
Right.
And so I think we need more theological education around how that tradition
Mhm.
emerged out of the African world, African culture and spirituality and so forth. So I would encourage that. I think a
And
good,
yeah.
I also want to say, I think also a good step is visit Ethiopian Orthodox churches,
Yeah.
visit Coptic Orthodox churches, right? To get a sense and feel what
Yeah.
an ancient African Christianity even feels like, what it looks like.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say to, Christian communities.
Well, you said something, and I think it could easily be unnoticed, but you mentioned a little while ago that the people you were working with on our SOAR set were like, why do you need to go to seminary, right?
Mhm.
Because they're very much organized around study groups. And then you're like, hey, if you're in a church, get a study group. And I think so often people feel like, oh, I'm not a scholar. I'm not the minister. I'm not the, official leader. And
Mhm.
so I can't do this, right? But you're saying, no, of course you can't, right? It's just a book club in some ways, right? A study group, it's a book
Exactly.
club.
Exactly.
And that we can all be empowered, right, to learn more. You don't have to wait for, Dr. Salim to come in, right, and talk to your community. But it's something that people can do also on their own. And so I just wanted to highlight that because I think
Yes.
it's something you take for granted, having come through some communities that are structured that way.
Yeah. Yes. No, we have the opportunity to do that. I know many over maybe the past 20 years or so, a lot of churches, especially big churches, have moved into the kind of the cell ministry where they have like smaller
Yeah.
smaller churches within
Yeah, old
larger.
Methodists used to call them quarterly meetings, remember,
Yeah,
right?
yes.
And they call them small groups now, right? Cell groups, right?
Small group, cell group. So I think, you all could do that. Another thing I would say to the church community and tradition, especially uh, African American churches, but even churches beyond that,
Hmm.
is that it bothers me that much of our theological formation is coming out of European Protestant traditions,
Hmm.
even on a very, local day-to-day level.
Yeah.
But most of our churches, we don't know anything about Howard Thurman. We don't know anything about the real MLK. I saw someone, a young person, they might have been a Gen Z, the other day. They said, man, they posted this right on social media. Wow, King was he's beyond what we think. He was very philosophically inclined, right? And of course, I'm sitting there laughing to myself, and when I saw, I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
King had a PhD in systematic theology, right?
Right.
King wrote a lot on ethics, morality, theology, philosophy, right? Beyond MLK Day, which is Monday, of course, coming this Monday.
Right.
We know, I have a dream, and we certainly know he was an activist and a freedom fighter for,
Yeah.
for liberty and justice. He was an incredible theologian and philosopher. And 9 out of 10 of our church, especially in Black America, they can tell me more about what, these polities have to say, and all these traditions than they can tell me about Howard Thurman or MLK or some of the other, scholars. Who I think about Melvin Washington, and certainly
Forget our living scholars.
our living scholars, right? And so I would encourage us to engage, to create study groups or Bible studies around that, because it's very, very important. We do have an organic theological tradition and tradition of biblical hermeneutics in African American culture, but yet it's not prevalent in most churches. So,
well, you're a teacher, you are a priest, you're a minister, and you've mentioned, this chaplain you met when you were in undergraduate college. But and this might be your answer, but I'd love to know. You tell us about one of your spiritual mentors, right, and about an impact that they've had on you as well.
oh, it's definitely that person that I met. His name is Reverend Dr. Cecil Gray. He changed my life. And I was, like I said, 19, 20-year-old undergrad. Absolutely, I'm on this path because of him. And, he knows that. And others of us who were mentored by him, we still stay in touch all these years later, right? And so, another mentor, he passed maybe 6-7 years ago. Dr. Ibrahim Faraji, Elias Faraji. I met him at Howard. In terms of being a practitioner and grounded in multiple traditions, right? He was also the Eastern Orthodox priest. He went to St. Vladimir Orthodox Theological Seminary in New York City. He was also initiate in Santeria. There was an Orthodox priest in Orthodox Christianity, an initiate in Santeria, right? And in Islam.
Right.
The last time I had contact with him before he passed, and it wasn't him directly, it was with his son and his wife. I was on my way to Switzerland for a Nubian studies conference, and I had a layover in Istanbul, along like 24 hours or more, right? And so he was living there because he was running an Islamic studies program. And so he said, oh, when you stop through Istanbul, I'm not going to be in town. I'm actually back in the States taking care of some things. He was teaching at Star King, right, up in the Bay Area, Unitarian Universalist Seminary. He said, but my wife and my son will take care of them. Right. So I hung out with them in Istanbul. Right. His son took me to a Sufi dervish ceremony
Ooh.
in Istanbul. Right. That's how Elias was, his fluidity in terms of his spiritual practice. Right. And then in the wink of an eye, he could be the Orthodox priest again. In the wink of an eye, the Santeria practitioner. In the wink of an eye, Islamicist. It was just, and so I met him, right? And then even his own gender, sexual identity, but also very fluid, right? And so, and I was at Howard when Dr. Kane Felder was there, right? This is like 94, although I left to go to Claremont. And I remember one time, may he rest in peace, because Dr. Felder just passed too, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Dr. Felder said, he said, hey, Elias is already in the 22nd century. he's way behind us, right? But he was halfway poking and teasing, but he was also saying like where he's at is the future. And so that's also what he was saying and poking fun at him and so forth. So, but I've had tons of other mentors, right? But Reverend Dr. Cecil Gray and then Ibrahim Faraji, also known as Elias Faraji, those two in particular mentored me into being multiple religious practitioner, a priest, a minister, a scholar, theologian, right? Those two had a tremendous impact, on who I am, what I do today.
Thank you so much for sharing from your personal experiences, right? We can all get to your scholarship, but thank you for sharing about your own journey, right, in your own faith and what this looks like for you. Where can our listeners find you? Where can they learn more about you?
I don't have an active website. I did, but it's like under construction. I have to redevelop it. But if you Google my name and put in California State University in my name, my faculty profile will come up and so forth. Then I have, some links to, some recent publications that I've written. And so that's the primary way.
Okay, we'll put all that in the show notes too, so people can find it and click there.
Yes. One of the things I've been working on, we have something called the Amun-Ra Theological Seminary. I'm the president of. I assumed the presidency in 2017. The founder, Dr. Itabari Zulu, who passed in 2019. And so, we're looking to relaunch, well, I should say we're working to relaunch Amun-Ra Theological Seminary, an online graduate theological seminary that will also be community friendly, right? That focuses exclusively on the spirituality, indigenous knowledge, and traditions of Africa and the African diaspora. So keep, folks to keep their eyes and ears open for Amun-Ra Theological Seminary. There's the actor Jaimun Husu, right? Who's from Benin. He played in Blood Diamond, right? He played in Amistad back in the day. Right?
Yeah.
He has a powerful documentary on Amazon Prime called Voodoo: The Roots to Heaven. It's powerful. He's talking about growing up in Benin and growing up in voodoo, right? Vodou. A very, powerful documentary. I always recommend that people check that out. It's on Amazon Prime. But at the end of the documentary, it's about an hour long. At the end of the documentary, he's interviewing some people, scholars, practitioners, and they're saying, look, we need to have chairs of African indigenous spirituality in general and voodoo in particular, at all our universities, right? And that struck a chord for me, so to speak, because I think that's important to have. It's not the only way to approach these traditions, but I think it's important to advancing them and preserving them, and also demonstrating their relevance as much as any other tradition, right? And so I'm definitely an advocate and proponent for that. And we're looking to do that with Honor Our Theologics, and we're looking to, advance it in that.
And I so love to hear this because we've been talking about this since, I met you in 2000,
Yes.
and there was barely an internet then, so it was a much more complex endeavor.
Yes,
in
yes.
some ways
It's
than it
true.
is now,
Where
right?
we
It was
are
kind
now,
of
right? Yes.
right. There was no Google, right?
Google
So,
anything. And when it was founded, though, internet did exist. It was in 96, 97. It was
yeah.
offered.
It just was like a baby internet, though.
Yeah, baby internet.
Like only students could get to it. Like, right? It wasn't something that everybody had.
No,
We were dialing up.
Exactly. You're right. I remember the dial-up.
Well, thank you again so much, Salim Faraji, for your time, for sharing. I know this has just been so informative to our listeners. And to our listeners, stay tuned for our next conversation, our next episode. Keep learning, keep listening, keep questioning, and keep breaking the rules about how religion is supposed to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Diverse Devotions, Black Belief Across Boundaries. I hope today's conversation has sparked something in you, whether it's a question, a new insight, or simply a deeper understanding of the many ways Black folk engage with spirituality and religion. Remember to check out the show notes for more resources. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe or follow, rate, and share to help others discover the power of diverse religious experiences. We'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment or send us a message about your thoughts and experiences at diversedevotions.com. Until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep breaking the rules of how faith is supposed to work.